been very important. And but it is more so at this point of time where we find ourselves in a very difficult place. And so this conversation assumes a lot of importance today. And I want to welcome every one of you who have joined here this evening. Your interest, your involvement, and your participation is greatly valued by all at Tracy. And some of you have already come and attended our conversations before. In fact, Tracy hosts these conversations every month, and you have been here. And you know how we've tried to look at issues and also look at a Christian perspective to all of those issues. And of course, a special welcome to several of you who have joined new this time for our conversation. And before we proceed, let me take this time to introduce to you Dr. Jamila Koshi, who will be sharing her thoughts with us this evening. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Dr. Jamila Koshi. She's a very, famous name as far as, mental health issues are concerned. And she's a psychiatrist by practice. She graduated with an MBBS from the Armed Forces Medical College, Pune, and completed her postgraduate studies in psychological medicine from the University of Bombay. She has served in the Indian Army, and Jamila has also written a lot of articles and contributed to many books and journals. And some of the books are Side by Side, which was brought out by Sai Express, Talking Families, and Should I Care by ISPCK. And more recently, Public Theology, Exploring Expressions of the Christian Faith, brought out by Primolog and Tracy. And she's also a gifted speaker, and she passionately speaks about several issues of concern for our context today. And also as a person, she's always available, willing to help, and kind and compassionate. But I think the character that I value the Sorry, I got muted. I think the character that I admire the most in Dr. Jamila is her outspokenness, the willingness to always speak her mind at any platform without fear, with much courage and conviction. And that is the Jamila that we really like to hear. And we've always listened to her, and it's always been, it helps us understand better many issues and things, and we are so glad that you're available for us today. And thank you, Dr. Jamila. And before I give the time to her, let me just run you through what we have in store for you today. Basically today, Tracy is changing the format of how we had our reflections over the past few months. And since Dr. Jamila has already circulated the paper, we thought that we will make it a conversational style. So we'll ask a few questions, and the audience, you can put in your questions in the chat box as and when they arise while we are talking to her. And of course, at the end of the session, there will be also time for you to ask questions if there are no questions during our conversation. And I request all of you to kindly mute yourself so that there's no disturbance and she can speak unhindered. And in between the conversation, we'll also have Isaac coming and sharing with us. Isaac is from Art for Change, and what Art for Change has actually done in the recent past in creating awareness about mental health. So to begin with, Dr. Jamila, thank you for that really, really good paper. Many of them, I'm sure, would have read the paper, but some of them probably wouldn't have had time to read it. And of course, there are others who have just joined the link directly. So for those who don't know about the paper, I'm sure it is there in the chat box, or it will come up very soon. The paper will come up very soon, but I guess we can't actually read the paper at this point of time. So Jamila, to start with, I just want you to give us a gist of what is there in the paper so that the audience will be able to connect to what you're going to say later on.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie, for that introduction. And yeah, if you were to ask me what I wrote in the paper, I have been reflecting a lot myself on this whole issue of hope and hopelessness, particularly in these times of COVID and, the whole strain of mental health and all that is going on with all of us. So it's been, of course, personal for me too, with illness in the family and other things. So hope has been something which I have been thinking about and maybe also struggling with. Therefore, I wrote out of a sort of a sense of it was almost forced out of me. This is the new way of looking at it, but it just came out spontaneously, that the world is hopeless around us. When we look at it, there is so much of darkness. If you go into details around the world, if you just live your life on the surface, it seems fine. But otherwise, if you look at it, the country and, our institutions and even our churches sometimes, and so many things are fraught with so much of problems and stress. And so there seems to be a lack of hope, which is pervasive. And that even involves our own personal lives. So our lives too are touched by this. And we have seen that particularly in the way the migrant labor walked home. And that was something which you cannot easily forget. What drove those people so desperate that they were willing to walk thousands of miles to get home? There was a sense of despair and, just helplessness. I just want to be in my comfortable place. And it struck me that most of our mental illnesses have a lack of hope or a struggle with hope as a major symptom, actually, if you look at it psychologically speaking. Of course, illnesses are mediated via the body, no doubt about that, but the psychological or symptom often reflected in our spiritual issues as well is often this lack of hope. So I went into it in detail as to how hopelessness is part of many mental illnesses. And then I wanted to stress on how hope is a central feature of Christian living. I mean, the ideal. I mean, you have faith, hope, and love, that triad that Paul mentions. And we talk about faith and we talk about love, but we don't talk that much about hope. There are, of course, a few books written by eminent scholars about it, but in the general talk, we don't stress that much on hope. Yet the people that we admire most, whether they are Christian, non-Christian, anybody, are usually people who have this hope about them. We are somehow drawn to them. They are the people who are, attractive like magnets because they have that hope in life. So I was just reflecting on how hope is central. Hope is Christ-centric, of course, for us. It comes from what God is, from what Christ has done for us. That is the source of our hope. But hope is to be our attitude in all situations. Ideally, okay, of course, we all struggle with it. That's not a question that we are always like that. We are not perfect. We're on the way. So we often struggle with it, but this is the ideal that we should strive for. And then I talked about how we can, in our various conversations with people, either in therapy or just as friends, how we can bring hope into our various thoughts, whether it's about the country, whether it's about the churches, whether it's about, institutions or people or families or ourselves itself, how we need to build on that hope aspect. So that was basically what my paper was about.
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, in fact, when I read your paper and I saw, how you had approached the whole thing, I really liked it because often mental health is associated with a lot of hopelessness. And I'm sure that for most of us, conversations that begin from our personal, struggles and our personal thought process is what actually communicates the best. And then as you move on in the paper, you've listed out the various kinds of, issues that one faces, starting with anxiety to, depression and all. And I like the fact of how you have actually linked each of those with the hope that is missing. Can you talk a little bit about those different things that you had laid out in the paper for us so that
yeah, sure. So what I was trying to bring out was that, see, the anxiety is a very common problem. Okay, so we have almost anxiety and depression together would be at least 1 in 10 people would be having this at least. Okay, that would be the minimum of number of people who are having this, 1 or 2 people in 10. So what is anxiety really? While it is a chemical reaction nurtured in the body to various stimuli, a sort of chemical reaction gone wrong, these are different ways of organically looking at it. But psychologically speaking, what is happening is that there is a worry or uncertainty about the future. Okay, so there is this sense of something happening or coming, which has not yet happened. So there's this sense of anticipation of something that is to come. And it's always linked with fear and worry about your loved ones or your health or yourself or something like that. So there is this struggle to maintain hope in the face of an impending catastrophe. That is what anxiety is, psychologically speaking. when you talk about depression, the person has crossed from that sense of coming anxiety, coming problem, or coming fears, or, anticipatory doom, to actually feeling that it has happened. And you have a sense of, hopelessness, a sense that, okay, now it has happened, now there's nothing more that can be done. So all the struggle to avoid the problem, which is the essence of anxiety, is now lost, and the person sinks into lethargy and withdrawal and, sadness. And so it is the sort of culmination of hopelessness, is seen in depression. Okay, whereas anxiety is a struggle to maintain the hope. Now, the same thing is seen in, say, stress reaction, acute stress reactions, which are many now in the sense of COVID. Okay, so as people go through the whole COVID situation, suppose you find yourself positive, you find your parents positive, things like that. The ambulance arrives, so the people are going through that sense of anxiety. All right, so their heart is pumping fast. They're sweating, maybe their pupils are dilated, and they're worrying about the thoughts are coming in that suppose I die, suppose I can't manage, how will I get the finances? So these kind of fears are there in the mind, and the person is struggling to maintain hope in the presence of this kind of acute, a catastrophe coming. That's an acute stress reaction. And the same issue, isn't it? They're struggling to maintain their hope. Now, when you come to a post-traumatic stress disorder, where a catastrophe has already happened, now what has happened is the person has gone through the worst, and it has so devastated their life that they are sort of obsessed with that, and flashbacks to what have happened, or memories of what has happened, with big gaps in the middle, because those things were too painful, and the lack of hope that I can pick up the pieces and carry on. Rather, there is a sort of continued reflection on the trauma. Okay, so in post-traumatic stress disorder, this is what is happening. So here also you see that lack of hope in picking up the pieces and carrying on and dealing with what has happened in the past. So here also the hope is involved. If you think of even a condition like substance abuse, I brought out that denial is a very common feature of alcohol abuse, or substance abuse. And what is denial? Denial is actually where you are blocking the anxiety of what has happened in your life by pretending that everything is normal. Okay, so you deny that there is any problem because you cannot face the truth of having reached this stage in your life. Okay, whether it is getting addicted to alcohol or using drugs excessively. Usually most people with dependence problems have tried to reduce the amount at some point in the past, almost inevitably. That is part of the syndrome. But they will not want to say that, look, I've tried to stop and I can't, and so I'm addicted. It's much easier to just deny it, because the hope that I will be able to deal with it is wavering. And facing that hope is extreme. That lack of hope is very difficult. So it's much easier to deny that there's a problem. Okay, so many of these illnesses have that lack of hope as a very central feature. So that is what I wanted to bring out.
Jamila, while you were listing these things, it also looks like actually, there's some kind of progression in stages. Would that be right? Or, or of course there are separate things as well, but also if left unattended, it can move on. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes, almost always that happens. Like anxiety, for instance, is the first stage. Often people are anxious about something. Their hope is wavering that they will be able to cope with the stress. Okay, and anxiety, when left unattended, often turns into depression. So depression, when left unattended, often turns into suicidal ideas and urges, and sometimes plans and committed suicide. So there is often a progression. Yes. Stress disorder, if it is untreated, undealt with, it turns into post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder often gets involved with, it gets into depression and, like that. So there is a progression, yes.
Would you put a percentage on how people, actually be more like that, or they're able to recover and get back to normal life? Or, as somebody who's been practicing for so many years, would you be able to say something about it?
Percentages. See, the problem is there. I don't think we are able to say untreated how many will turn into this. I don't think would dare to put a figure on it, okay, as to how many will recover completely without. Many acute, I'll tell you this much, acute stress reactions, many people recover, okay. So if the stress is over, many people go through the stress. Now, COVID, many people are going through the stress of it, but most of the time they talk to their friends, they talk to their pastors, they're all getting some form of help, all right? And many people will come out. Now, I won't dare put a figure on it exactly, all right? I'm sure there might be some studies which have put a figure, but let me not go into that here.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, because why I raise such a question as that is because now, of course, you yourself said that now our times are so difficult and many of us are feeling increased level of stress. And, you know, so you, of course, you also said that we are finding help from different people, pastors or church or wherever. Having said that, we are also seeing that a lot of forums and a lot of different, you know, people are actually bringing up this issue, talking about it. And, but yet at the same time, what we've noticed over the past many years is mental health being so important, yet, you know, there's so much of silence around it. And people, they don't want to address the issue of mental health. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, thankfully that silence is being broken now, and that is the one silver lining that we can see from this whole, this pandemic, that it has raised the issue of mental illness, and many people are talking about it. So it's coming into the limelight, and that's very good. People are addressing the issue. Perhaps, hopefully, the stigma will lessen. I think one of the major reasons why people don't talk about it is the stigma. People tend to think that mental illness happens to those who are either weak in character or, you know, weak in some way, okay, so morally weak or spiritually weak or something like that. So there's some sense of weakness that people perceive about mental illness. Otherwise, it is seen as a problem with the family, all right? So there's a family problem. It's the family is to blame, or the family is stigmatized. That is obviously not acceptable either. So it's easier not to talk about it rather than to have the whole family put into this category of, you know, sort of to be ostracized kind of thing. Maybe another issue would be that sometimes mental illness is seen very commonly really as a curse or demon possession or, you know, that sort of thing, okay? So if it is seen in those terms, obviously nobody wants to very clearly admit to it, all right? So I think a lot of the problem is misunderstanding and a lack of awareness of what mental illness is, that it's extremely common itself, people don't realize, all right? The latest study showed that 1 in 7 to 9 people have some form of mental illness, okay? That is the Indian study. Now that is an extremely high rate, isn't it? If you have that many people having some form of mental illness, there's nothing to feel stigmatized about at all. All of our families have it. Every single family has some form of mental illness or the other. So there's actually nothing to stigmatize. It's just another illness. Just deal with it and carry on. Hopefully that is coming. Okay, we're talking about hope, so we should be hopeful. So I think we should be hopeful that people are getting aware and sort of are willing to talk about it. It's a great thing. I'm happy about that.
Yeah, in fact, to hear it from you, it's very good, because you are, as a psychiatrist, you're saying that, you know, it's opening up and you feel very positive about it. It's good actually that more people are talking about it. I also want to ask you, is there a gender aspect to mental health, about, you know, how it affects men and women? How do they express or handle it? And, you know, and how do they, you know, address the whole thing? What are your thoughts on that part of?
Yes, Bonnie, there are definitely gender aspects to it in various ways. If, for instance, some illnesses or some syndromes are more common in one gender or the other. For instance, more women tend to have anxiety and depression. That's been seen almost globally. But then simultaneously, men tend to show more substance abuse. So often they have found that the expression of anxiety and depression in women is a sort of overtly mood problem, okay? Whereas in men it is it is not so acceptable to show anxiety or depression, but it's more acceptable to, to maybe drink or smoke, to get into one of those things. So that's the gender aspect. And then there are so many other gender aspects to it. For instance, men, their treatment will sometimes be very subtly different from what happens to women. So sometimes, just like, women's heart attacks are often ignored because they're not the typical left-sided chest pain sort of thing. There's a slightly different pattern. So often it gets ignored. Similarly, a lot of women's anxiety, depression sometimes can be ignored for years because it's sort of taken for granted that, oh, she just has a headache, she just has a, she's like that. Whereas actually it's a clinically treatable illness. Go and get it treated, go and get therapy, it'll help you. But sometimes that is neglected because it's seen as just a women's thing. That happens sometimes. So there are various aspects of the gender thing. Sometimes we've also seen that in one sense, it's easier if the woman has a problem because of our structure of our families. If the husband sort of puts his foot down and says, no, you have to get treated, then the woman sometimes will come and get treated. But if the guy is sick, it's very difficult to get him to take treatment because he's not going to listen to his wife. So that becomes a problem. So at various levels, there are gender issues. One in the expression of the illness, two in the way it is diagnosed and treated, and sometimes just these little aspects of how society helps to sort of get the treatment and all facilitated. That also there is a gender aspect to it.
So having talked about gender, I also want to ask you about equity in access to mental health care. Because of course, between the ones who are urban and rural, or the ones who are richer and poorer, can you talk a bit about the ability to access care?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think there is a huge rich poor divide, of course. See, the poor who are sort of predominate in many of these mental illnesses in two ways. One is that they are more prone to it because the stress factors are more, because there's more intermarriage, because there are additional trigger factors in the poor. That is one reason. The other reason is sometimes because what we call the downward drift. People with mental illness often struggle with jobs and they tend to sort of go down in the socioeconomics ladder. So both ways, the poor are disproportionately represented sometimes in mental illness. But yes, the facilities are obviously not adequate, and the rich poor, the urban rural divide is there. The psychiatrists are mostly in the towns and they have very few in the cities. There are fewer NGOs and pastoral care of good standing in the villages as compared to cities. So there is definitely a rich poor and a rural urban divide here, which we need to address, which we need to sort out, right? Yeah. So there is a huge need there.
See, you earlier mentioned about like a study in India said that 1 to 7 to 9%, they have issues of mental health issues. And see, I was also listening the other day to the UN event, the big event on mental health, on the World Mental Health Day. And, the constant thing that they were talking about is to, invest in healthcare and to be committed to healthcare. And also, another thing that I heard there was like, of course, which others have talked about as well is, overall health and well-being is intricately linked to mental health. And, health-seeking behavior is so much more when it comes to our health, and yet we neglect that part of mental health. Can you talk a bit about our, health-seeking behavior as far as mental health is concerned?
I think what happened in the past, hopefully it's changing now. What happened in the past was that minor problems didn't get picked up early enough, except in those who are quite aware. Certain states are very aware. So some states, the more literate states, the more aware states tend to pick up problems faster. For instance, in Kerala, people tend to pick up the problems faster and it reaches a greater proportion of people. But otherwise, milder problems get ignored till they become severe problems. When they become severe problems, then of course you cannot avoid, and then there is health-seeking behavior. Then they take them for the care and all that. But then again, what we see is that once the acute problem is over, often people do not persist with follow-up. Often there is a denial, again, the same problem, that there is a denial that, look, this is a problem often which requires continued care. If not medication and therapy, at least follow up to see that there is no relapse, or to see that if there is a relapse, a quick restarting of treatment in whatever form. So the follow-up also tends to be a little wanting. Mm-hmm. So yeah, health-seeking behavior often happens only in the extremes of problems. Mm-hmm. That is a problem that we need to correct. That the quicker we treat these things, the better it is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we have cases who have been untreated for 15 years, 16 years. People have brushed this off as just normal behavior, or some kind of possession state or something like that, and it's ignored. Mm-hmm. So yeah, hopefully this will also change.
Yeah. So, and of course, there are some personal questions coming in, which we will pick up later on. But, I think a large number of our people, I think most of them gathered here today are like people, Christians, and, people from the church. And of course, I want to go back to your point where we first started about hope itself, Jamila. In your paper, you lay out how hope, why we need to have, because from where we started in Christ as believers, and then how we look at the future, how we look at our temporal life, and all of that. So, there is always that disconnect between what we actually know as knowledge and how we actually would live out as practical reality. How can we handle that? What should we be doing?
That's a good question. I think, to accept where we are is not very easy. Perhaps we all need to learn to take our emotional temperature and to take to understand our thoughts, to not deny what we are thinking. Sometimes we sort of like to put a very, very rosy picture of ourselves to others, or even to ourselves, that everything is fine. But to accept that I am struggling with this, or I am frustrated, or I am right now confused, or I am, I am lost, or I have fears for the future. To accept this in so many words requires a certain amount of self-awareness and also courage to put that in words and not be scared to say it. That it doesn't matter if I'm going through this, but I will find a way out. It's only when I say to myself that I'm going through this that I can look for help, or, move on from there. So perhaps that's what we need to do. We need to learn to take our emotional temperature a little more often and be honest about it. Okay. In that sense, the Bible is a great example, because our heroes of faith often are portrayed just the way they are. So David is portrayed as he is, as maybe a lustful man who gave in to an impulse, and who actually manipulated his rival, the husband of the woman he wanted, and he got him killed. And so these things are openly said. And then David's confession and his despair at what he was almost, and his reaching out to God in hope, all that is recorded, no? So we have good examples in scripture for facing up to what we are. And I think I have been learning that myself as I'm dealing with my mom's illness. Now, when you have somebody with the terminal illness, what do you hope for? What are the thoughts which go through your own mind? No, we have to be honest about it. There are struggles that we go through. Now, it's good to be honest about what we're going through. Whenever we are going through these things, all of us have some problem or the other. I don't think there's any of us who has a completely great life with no problem at all. But we need to accept what we are. Okay, I have a problem with my family. We are struggling with financial issues, or we have some property dispute. Now, we say it out loud, Lord, there is this property dispute, and I find myself getting angry. Now, how am I to deal with it? I can hope that you will, help me to find the solution. I can hope that you will help me to be the light in the family who sets the example of the good behavior. So you hope for something and then you work towards it. But that can only happen when we accept what we are. Does that help answer that question, or
Yeah.
did I digress?
No, the thing is actually, because when we say, like, because there's always a compartmentalization, no, that this belong to the church, this belong to the spiritual realm, and the other one is the mental health. Like when you said the example of David, like whatever he went through, there were issues of mental health as well linked to it. We never hear such things. I mean, and the church, I want to like bring you to the church's role in this whole thing. When you look at the church, and your paper was on hope, and the church is actually like a place where you restore people, where you're supposed to give so much of hope, and yet that mental health aspect of it, is it focused on enough by the church and the Christian community?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of focus in many ways, because there are, there's attempts at counseling and pastoral counseling and all sorts of training for counseling. All that is going on. I think we are making a very brave attempt in many ways. I don't think there's any church which doesn't have a focus on counseling.
Okay.
It's very much in everyone's radar. Now we need to get more effective at it. That's all. We need to get more knowledgeable about it. We need to get more scientific about it and meld the scientific and the spiritual together, so that we don't just like if someone has a heart attack, we accept that we should treat the heart attack, and we also pray for recovery. So it's both things together. Now I think often with serious mental illness, that's how it should be. You treat the serious mental illness, and you pray for recovery, and you support the family, and these are all the various things which should happen together. In many ways it is happening. There are many people who are trying. Of course, there's always scope for getting better at it. And the more we talk about it like this, I think the better it will get.
Yeah, Jamila, it's really good to hear you on these counts, because basically for us who are a little not aware of these things, for you to say that actually church is doing more and they're actually doing counseling and helping people is good. In fact, there's a question here in the box to say, what is the role of the Christian community in addressing stigma? Would you answer that?
Okay, what is the role of the Christian community in addressing stigma? I think we should set the trend in first accepting that we have problems ourselves. The more Christians are seen as people who are honest about their own problems. Okay, so if I remember there was a pastor in Singapore who wrote an article about how he was struggling with anxiety and depression. Okay, now would we do that here? I mean, would we be able to say that, look, I'm struggling with this, but I believe God is helping me and he's helping me to come out. So if we put it like that, it's a very positive example, that look, if he can suggest that, if he can admit to having this and struggling with it and dealing with it, why can we not? So I think an increased level of honesty about this is what is required in all of us. So for instance, let me start by admitting, by setting the ball rolling by my own family. I look at my family and I find that we have in my family obsessive compulsive disorder, okay, a very severe form of obsessive compulsive disorder. We have a paranoid schizophrenic, okay, paranoid schizophrenia is there in my family. Depression is there in my family. Anxiety is there in my family, okay. Now it's all there. These are all problems which, relatives have, problems which I have, some of them. So this is fine. We just deal with it. We just treat it. We just go ahead, and that should reduce the stigma, that it's okay to have a little bit of all this. It's just life. It's just normal. Okay. It's just human fallen nature that we have illness. Now we deal with it. We ask God for the help, for the proper, help from whatever source. And we ask God for the help to continually deal with it, to deal with our limitations whenever it comes in our family and in us, and we go on. So an increased level of anxiety, of honesty, an increased level of discussion, okay, as we are doing, an increased level of reaching out to people with these problems, that will certainly help. I know that the Christian community often led the Indian society in helping children with, for instance, with special needs. Okay, it was often the Christian community that did that. And children with special needs were also looked down on. There was a huge stigma. But the Christian community reached out to them, and we, in a sense, I think I would be right in saying this, we set the trend in taking care of these children. Mm-hmm. And that really helped to reduce the stigma, I think. And I think we will continue to help to deal with the stigma by admitting that, yes, we have these things, and we deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, but only thing I want to ask you here again is that admitting to issues of mental health will help, destigmatize and have people accept the situation more. But at the same time, there is always a picture of perfect and of being proper as far as leadership is concerned. Because in the beginning also you had said, like, why you focused also on hope is also the fact that we like to have as our models and followers people with hope. So actually those two have to actually go together. Now, can you throw a little light on how you can hold those two together while admitting that, there are issues and yet, holding on to a hope?
Yeah, see, if we never had any problems, why would we need to have hope?
Yeah.
The hope comes in when there are problems, and we are asking God for the strength to carry on, and we have a picture of a positive outcome. Okay, so we have a hopeful future because we are in a difficult situation. If everything was fine, then there was no need for hope. It would just be the love, joy, and peace. No. Right? So hope is hope. The very word hope implies that there is a need for there is a need for improvement or betterment or something like that. And hopeful people, see, we are attracted to hopeful people because they are not denying that they have problems. I remember a picture of one family who was one of these migrant families who was walking home. All right. Now, most of the migrant families who were walking home, they were poor things in trouble. No, they were all stressed and they were tired and they were weary. Okay, so they were struggling, isn't it? But there was this one family who had these two children, and they were carrying their belongings on their head, the woman and the man. And they were actually laughing and smiling and talking. And they were saying, "Sab theek ho jayega, we will manage." And they had that hope. And I just looked at them and I thought, look at this family. I mean, they are in such a desperate situation, but still they are so hopeful. And that is something that probably, is that what you're talking about?
Correct. I mean, it's very good. I mean, the way you answered is very good actually, because at the end of the day, it's all about perspective, how you have a certain perspective to things that you're going through and holding it together as well. Thanks, Jamila. That is important because for you to have said that. See, and thank you also for the fact that you've been reiterating that the church has been responding, the church has been doing its bit, and they were leaders as well. So even in creating awareness, I think there have been different efforts taken.